Thank you for tuning in to the Injustice Anywhere radio program. My name is Bruce Fisher. I'm the co-founder of Injustice Anywhere. We are an all-volunteer organization working to correct wrongful convictions. We have now developed a network of websites all working to bring more attention to wrongful convictions. You can view our main website at injustice-anywhere.org. You can also Google Injustice Anywhere, and you should see our main website right there at the top of the page. We currently have 7 featured cases. Those cases are detailed on our homepage. When visiting, you will also find links to Facebook and Twitter. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter in order to keep up to date with current events. Tonight, we will be discussing the Nicole Kish case. Nicole is known to friends and family as Nyki. It's N-Y-K-I if you're searching that on Google. Nyki was wrongfully convicted on March 1st, 2011, of second-degree murder for the stabbing death of Ross Hammond in Toronto, Canada, on August 8th, 2007. This is an Injustice Anywhere featured case. You can visit freenyki.org, that's N-Y-K-I, and the Injustice Anywhere website to keep up to date with this case. While visiting freenyki.org, if you are able, please consider making a donation to Nyki's Defense Fund. Tonight's guests will be Nyki's mother, Christine Bivens, and English solicitor Clive Wismayer. Clive is a core member of Injustice Anywhere. Clive wrote the overview for Nyki's case that can be found on our website. At this time, I'd like to introduce our guests. We'll bring them on now. Hi, Christine. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you so much for having me on here.
Thank you for joining us. Hi, Clive. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Bruce. Hi, Christine.
Hello, Clive.
First off, I want to thank Clive for joining us from England, where I believe it's just now after 2 a.m. Thank you for staying up for us tonight, Clive.
No problem, Bruce.
Now, before we get into the facts of the case, I would like our listeners to learn a little bit about Nyki. Christine, from a mother's point of view, how is Nyki holding up?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. She's most days doing very well. We try very hard to keep her extremely busy. We purchase correspondence courses so she can do university courses. We keep her phone card packed with money so she can phone home at every opportunity and keep in close touch. But she is living in a prison and she is wrongfully convicted, so there are many, many, many dark moments in her days.
Now, is Nyki optimistic about her upcoming appeal?
Yes and no. Nyki knows what should happen at her appeal, but sadly, we also felt that way at her trial. She's hoping against hope. She doesn't want to put all her eggs in the appeal basket right now because, quite frankly, she doesn't know how she would react if she put 100% of her belief in the appeal. She's hoping for one of the 3 top items we asked for. She just does not want to spend the rest of her life in prison for a crime she did not commit.
Importantly, too, how are you holding up? How is this ordeal taking a toll on you and your family?
It doesn't just affect Nicole. You've got it affects each and every member of her family and friends. I mean, she's been taken away from her little sister. She's been taken away from me, from her dad, from everyone that loves her, her aunts, her uncles, her cousins. She's a very family-oriented young woman, and it's been horrifying. And there's, I imagine, one thing worse than the phone call we got that night, August 9th, and that would be the phone call the Hammond family got.
I mean, it's a tragedy all around, and wrongful convictions cause additional victims. There's just no way around that.
This is a case where that needn't not happen. The police had the evidence they needed. They just chose to go off on a wrong direction.
That's unfortunate. Your daughter, she's a talented artist. I was listening to her music today that you had sent me. The show opened with Nyki's song, Heaven Knows, and we'll be playing one of her songs in its entirety a little later in the show. Tell us a little bit about the singing and songwriting. Is she currently permitted to express herself while incarcerated, or is that limited?
Well, Nicki has just been released from the maximum security unit at Grand Valley, and in the maximum unit, no guitars were allowed. Actually, under the former warden who just left, no guitars were allowed at all at Grand Valley. There's a new warden, and Nicki is now in the medium section, so we are very hopeful we will be able to send her guitar. But right now she's making do. The chaplain is helping out, and she's using the chaplain's guitar. And she's practicing her heart out for a talent show in there. She will be singing one of my favorite songs, the Leonard Cohen song, and she loves her music. It's something that gives her strength.
That's great to hear that
in there.
The chaplain's offering his guitar in the meantime.
Her guitar, yes. She's a wonderful woman.
Oh, her guitar. I'm sorry.
Yes. No problem.
Now, there's also a blog that's on freenicki.org that Nicki writes. Has the writing helped her to cope with her situation? And how does she get that information onto the blog? Is that sent to you or another person that puts it online?
There was a few of us who worked helping her get her blogs out. She would phone and repeat them verbatim, and we would copy them down and put them out there. So any of the mistakes you see there are ours, not hers.
Okay,
and
so they're basically sent over just by phone conversation.
Exactly. That's the only way we could get them out securely. Mail did not work.
Yeah, there's many details of the case that make up the tragic night that began the nightmare for Nicki and her family. We're going to see if we can get most of these aspects of the case in on the time we have tonight. Clive, you have done extensive research on this case. What was it that led you to get involved?
Good question. I was roaming around the forum at Injustice Anywhere, looking at other cases, because I came to the forum via the Amanda Knox case. And two things struck me about Nicki's case. One was that there was a written judgment because her trial was a non-jury case, so there's an extensive judgment, which makes a big difference. And the second thing was that the case badly needed a factual summary, which is what I set out to write. I ended up producing something completely different. And in fact, the case still needs a factual summary. Maybe I should do one. But I ended up doing something completely different with Christine's immeasurable help. But I just found myself getting sucked further and further into the facts of the case while trying to prepare this summary that never appeared. So those
I
two
ended up
reasons,
calling
really.
that a case overview on the website, but I honestly don't know how you can shorten it because every detail you put in there is necessary.
Well, if it were an overview, I could do it in one page. It's actually a critique of the judgment. That's really what it is, and in fact, it's not so dissimilar in many respects from the appeal document that's been filed, although they don't completely overlap. But it's more a critique of the judgment, a statement of the facts of the case. In fact, it does contain a brief statement of facts, but it's an identification case. It's a street brawl with lots and lots of witnesses and lots of detailed testimony. So extracting the threads from that is pretty difficult.
Right. Now, this incident took place on West Queen Street, Toronto. There were many people out there at that night. Restaurant workers, passersby, taxi drivers, streetcar passengers. It was just a busy night. And Nicki and some of her friends are also present on this active street that night as well, correct?
Yes.
Now, who were the main characters? Who were the friends that Nicki was with that night? Why were they out on the street at night?
It was Nicki's 21st birthday. August 8th should have been one of the happiest days of her life. And instead it was the start of a nightmare. She was with some friends. They were having an impromptu party in the park just off of Queen Street. And they decided around midnight to go grab a beer in a bar and had the awful misfortune of running into two gentlemen who had been out on a work-related evening.
And those two gentlemen were?
George Dranicek and Mr. Ross Hammond.
Okay. And now how did the three people that were with Nicki...
well, there were many people with Nicki, but there were three that were charged. They were the three that remained at the scene with Nicole. And that would be Jeremy Woolley, Faith Watts, who also used the name Sarah, and Doug Fresh.
And none of them were charged with any crime, correct?
Yes, all four of them were initially charged with two counts of assault, one against Mr. Hammond and one against George Dranicek.
Okay. Now, how did the skirmish? How did it break out? If this was at an ATM machine?
Well, that's a story that's morphed as time has gone on. It was close to an ATM machine. A woman approached the two gentlemen and asked for spare change. The gentleman had been drinking quite a bit, and there were some pretty hideous, I'm not sure what you would call them, but some pretty hideous words exchanged. And
at this request for money, his response was not kind.
No, it was not. It was not. Matter of fact, I had to go to an Urban Dictionary and look up some of the words because I'd never heard them before.
Okay.
But more people from the street came over to see what was happening, and Nicole happened to be one of those people. A verbal argument ensued, and Nicki was struck by one of the two gentlemen, and the two gentlemen decided to leave the scene. Nicki followed, asking loudly for anyone, to please call 911, yelling that this man had hit her. This man was getting away. The two men attempted to get on a streetcar. For some reason, the streetcar driver closed the door and barred it to the two men, and a fight ensued. The fight was, we think, between Douglas Fresh and Ross Hammond. And perhaps there was a second fight on the other side of the streetcar with George Dranicek being involved. There were many people in the street, and there were many people who were offended by, especially Mr. Dranicek's comments to the women involved. They were over and above anything you would normally hear in any kind of public setting. The fight on the
what you ended up with was just a brawl with
exactly.
a good amount of people out there on the street and a lot of chaos going on that evening, correct?
Correct. That's exactly what one of the witnesses said. She said it was just chaos. It felt like there were fights breaking out everywhere.
So now, after this altercation concludes, what happens with Ross Hammond? You said he attempted to leave the scene, but as we know, he ended up dying from the injuries.
He got to the streetcar. There was a fight on the south side of the streetcar with Douglas Fresh. That I hesitate to call it a fight because I don't believe Douglas Fresh landed a single punch. Mr. Hammond was a very physically fit man, a very large man, and he was a very angry man that evening, and Douglas Fresh was soon rendered unconscious. Mr. Hammond then went to the north side of the streetcar, and there was a second altercation, at least a second altercation with him. It may have been a third. And then he hooked his arm. He now had a knife in his hand, and he hooked his arm through the open door of a taxi cab, which took him about half a block down the street, where he collapsed.
He didn't die at the scene. He died a couple days later at the hospital, correct?
That's correct. At the scene, he was treated by EMS immediately because someone had called for Nicole earlier, so there was an ambulance that was there very quickly. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the ambulance workers said he was too sweaty and combative to treat in the ambulance. They didn't even take his blood pressure, and Mr. Hammond was DOA at the hospital. They managed to revive him,
But he was belligerent all the way up till the time that he was unconscious.
Yes, according to the ambulance attendant.
Right. Now, at the time that the ambulance shows up, Nicki and her friends, they don't leave the scene, correct? They go to the ambulance for assistance because Nicki had been struck.
Yes, they first went to the police that arrived at the scene, but they were about a half a block away from where the ambulance was. And so after talking to the police, they walked down to the ambulance. Nicki had a very serious injury. She had been stabbed through her left forearm, and it was a spurting wound, which meant there was blood everywhere. It was very disorienting for her, and it needed treatment and quickly.
So that wound actually hit an artery, correct?
We think so. Unfortunately, one of the many things that were missing were the police notes from the doctors at the hospital, but the medical experts we had that looked at the pictures of the spray said it's arterial spray. It was certainly all over Queen Street, her blood. It was
sure, so that confirmed that it was a serious wound.
Yes. Oh, yes. She had to have 2 surgeries afterwards to try to repair it.
Okay. So if Clive could step in here, we have a situation where a street brawl breaks out, and the people that end up sticking around at the scene to get medical attention, from what I've heard, Nicki actually had to get out of the way as they were putting Mr. Hammond into the ambulance. So she made absolutely no effort to avoid this situation. How did she wind up being the one that was charged with this crime?
Well, it seems as though the investigating officer, Detective Sergeant Gary Giroux, locked on to the evidence of 2 particular witnesses called Stopford and Paget. Molly Stopford and I think Jonathan Paget. They were travelling on the streetcar together, and they had a view out of the window of the fight that Christine just described to the side of the streetcar, in which Fresh was having his head bashed against the side of the streetcar. And summing up their evidence together, I think what they said was that there was a woman who broke up that fight, and they thought that she was the same woman who was later seen on the other side of the street nursing an injury. Now, that second woman was definitely Nicki. The first woman definitely had a knife. They both agreed that she did. And I think that Giroux took them at their word that this was the same woman, arrives at the scene with a knife, then a few minutes later, a couple of minutes, she's seen on the other side of the street bleeding from her arm, and on the basis of that, they picked out Nicki as Giroux picked out Nicki as the killer. This is before any forensic evidence had come in. I hear Christine wants to.
I do. I want to interject because it is something that so bothers me. I believe Giroux picked Nicki out because of the timing of her bail hearing. Nicki was the only one of the people arrested who would have been entitled for bail. The other 3 people were Americans who were not in Canada legally. Not that it's a big deal. Americans and Canadians cross the border all the time. But her bail hearing was also scheduled for the morning of Ross Hammond's funeral for whatever legal, it wasn't something that we could change at that point in time. The media here was in a frenzy, as much as the Canadian media ever get in a frenzy. And if Nicole had been granted bail on the same day as Hammond's funeral, it would have been a public relations nightmare for the Toronto police. So I think that had a lot to do with Giroux's increasing Nicole's charges from aggravated assault to second-degree murder.
That's an excellent point to make. Now, the investigation, as I'm looking at it, I mean, it was botched from the beginning. Was there a sense that maybe they didn't feel that Hammond was going to die? I know he lived for a couple days, but it doesn't seem like they treated this as a murder, scene on the street. They let a lot of people go. Witnesses weren't questioned. Surveillance tapes ended up missing. So much was lost or not attempted to gain from the evidence that was there that night. Is that a possibility that it was just another street fight and they didn't think anybody was going to die?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. That section of Queen Street is just past the main entertainment district, but still a very, very busy and up-and-coming neighborhood. There are fights there all the time. There are stabbings there all the time.
So it's a commonplace for that street to have these brawls. The police probably get tired of the calls.
Certainly, but in Nicki's case, a TV reporter was very close by and happened to get footage of Nicki coming up to the ambulance and Ross Hammond laying there on the sidewalk and then being loaded into the ambulance. And it was disturbing footage, and they showed it constantly, and that whipped up a frenzy. They had reported Nicki's case as panhandlers kill tourist in entertainment district. So the media
took off with the misinformation campaigns right from the start, and Nicki and her friends were thrown into the categorization of being street people that frequented that street. Is that the case?
Yes.
And they're having problems with these people to begin with, and it's something they were trying to put an end to. So obviously charging and getting a conviction for murder from one of these so-called street people would have been a victory for this prosecution, wouldn't it?
Oh, it was a big victory. They were able to ram through some legislation called the Safe Streets Act. And when we went to Toronto for the various court hearings leading up to Nicki getting bail, it was a very different city when we went there. We didn't see the buskers, the street people. We didn't have anyone ask us for money. We didn't see the sidewalk artists. It was a barren city. They were able to use that to quickly ram through this, and everyone was either picked up, put in jail, or ticketed so largely that Toronto was not a place for them to be.
So in the end, it did help to clean up the street with this crackdown, but they created a victim in the process.
Certainly.
Now I want to go back to the initial, before the fight started, just to get a little bit of a narrative. Who was it that asked Hammond for money? Who was it that started that? Was that Nicki and her friends, or who was that?
It was a woman who testified only at the prelim hearing. We couldn't find her after that. She had gone to Alaska, and she dropped off the radar. The police were not able to help us with that, so she did not appear at Nicki's trial. But she, at Nicki's prelim, she asked Dranachek for money. She asked him for spare change.
Okay. Which helped start this whole street people conversation.
Yes, yeah.
The idea of somebody asking panhandling.
Exactly. And to be quite honest, Nicki had just completed a backpacking trip across North America. She had dreadlocks. She wore a long skirt. She looked like your typical hippie child. I was very proud of her for earning enough money to spend a year seeing our beautiful continent. But that can be twisted very easily.
Right, and these are young people. You're going to go through various stages in your life of how you dress and what how you style your hair, and you go on these long trips, and there's lots of things you do at that age that certainly should not be judged as it was in this case.
I agree.
It was a perfect storm all at once right there for her to fall into this trap, from what I can, reading from the evidence that I have in front of me.
Yes, I agree.
Now, Clive, you've done a lot of research on the actual evidence of the case during the fight. The prosecutor locked in on a single knife theory, or was this the judge that locked in on a single knife theory? What would you like to say about the possibility of multiple knives? That these multiple confrontations took place on the street.
It's central to understanding the case. The judge's one knife theory and his ancillary theory about mixed blood on the knife are absolutely crucial to the miscarriage of justice. There is plenty of evidence from witnesses at the scene that there was more than one knife being used that night. Not only was Hammond stabbed and Nicki stabbed, so was Nicki's boyfriend, Jeremy Woolley. A guy we may get to later was showing off stab wounds to witnesses. It's known that at that time street kids in Toronto commonly carried knives, and it's also known that there were far more people involved in this incident than the 4 people that the judge focused on. If you read his judgment, you won't get any impression at all from any part of it that there were more than 4, we'll call them street kids, involved. As far as the judge is concerned, this is the 4 street kids that walked up to the ambulance against the 2 so-called jocks, Ross Hammond and George Dranachak. The judge pays no regard at all to the plenty of evidence from some that there were as many as 8 to 10 people fighting. As Christine has said, the group involved, the group that was celebrating Nicki's birthday was certainly more than 4 people. So this idea that there's just one knife is completely crazy. The judge, I was rereading today closing submissions from the defense in which the judge interrupted Nicki's counsel, John Scarf, to say that as far as he was concerned, there had been no evidence before him of more than one knife in the case. It seems to me very unsatisfactory for the judge to make a finding, which he did, that there was only one knife just because nobody had produced a second knife. Any other knives would have been taken away by the protagonists who didn't hang around. And as we already said, the police initially treated this as an ordinary street fight. They didn't seal off the area. They didn't go straight into lockdown mode or homicide mode straight away. If Hammond had survived, as he easily might, because the fatal wound penetrated his heart by a very small amount, the difference of half a centimetre, had he survived, this would have gone down as an affray and would have remained in whichever division it was in Toronto, 11th Division, I think, investigating as a routine brawl on a late weekend night.
So this judge basically simplified this situation incredibly. He took
he oversimplified,
a major street brawl and isolated it to 4 people and 1 knife. And how did this knife just pass from person to person to person to create all the damage that it created? Was that explained?
Well, the knife did pass from person to person. It got from the woman who broke up the fight between Fresh and either Hammond or Dranachak. It got from there into Hammond's hands. We know that this knife belonged to Faith Watts. There's no dispute on either side that she and her boyfriend, Doug Fresh, stole 2 identical knives in Montreal shortly before this incident. And as I say, they were identical. Fresh's knife was found on him without any, it hadn't been used, it hadn't been brought out, there was no blood on it. The matching knife was found beside Hammond's body. So he had got hold of it somehow. Faith Watts' evidence at the preliminary hearing was that he got hold of it from her, that she pulled it out. As soon as she opened the blade, he just snatched it off her.
So she provided video testimony that stated that he snatched the blade from her, but she really provided no other information.
Yeah, the rest of her evidence was that she was too zoned out on OxyContin to remember anything else. So she remembers taking the knife out and Hammond taking it away from her and thinking, oh shit, and that's all she remembers. She blanks out. But it's definitely her knife, and it definitely ends up with Hammond. We know that. But we don't know that it's the murder weapon. And that's another enormous leap that the judge makes, that this knife is the murder weapon. I can go into that if this is a good
quickly,
time.
if you want to discuss that, I think it's important.
It is crucial because the knife was found to have mixed DNA on the blade from Nicki and from Hammond. And the judge drew the inference that, as he called it, the irresistible inference that it must have been the murder weapon. But he failed to take account of the fact that Hammond had cut hands. He had the typical defensive injuries that somebody warding off a knife attack ends up with. The top of one of his thumbs was actually sliced off. And he had a cut in the web between his thumb and forefinger. Both of those wounds would have bled profusely. That evidence was brought out from the Crown expert, Dr. Polainen. He agreed with defense questions that both these wounds would have bled substantially. So Hammond carries away the knife. It doesn't matter which hand he uses to do that, but he covers it in his own blood that way. And yet the judge makes this inference, which is an invalid inference, that the blood on the knife came from him being stabbed. And that is just an absolutely crucial finding, which is based on no evidence whatsoever. It's been plucked out of the judge's own head.
It's a giant leap. If he's bleeding that much from his hand, blood on the knife would be obvious where the blood came from. And Nicki's wound hit an artery, so she's bleeding profusely.
Yeah, there's no difficulty at figuring out how Nicki's blood comes to be on the knife. She was definitely cut with that knife by Hammond as he cut his way out of the scrimmage he must have been involved in to clamp himself to this taxi and escape down the road. I imagine him wildly slashing in all directions just to get away, and Nicki is important to bear in mind the nature of Nicki's wound. It's a wound to the soft part of her forearm, and if the listeners want to imagine how you could get that wound, they just need to put their arm up in front of their face in a defensive position with their palm out, and they'll find they're presenting that side of their forearm outwards. So it's a defensive wound. It's not the type of wound that an attacker gets when stabbing somebody. An attacker will get wounds to their fingers and to their hands and wrists, but they won't get a big slash to their forearm. It's just not the right type of wound. And Nicki had no wounds of the type that is consistent with a knife attacker.
I would like to just make a point. She had no other wounds at all. She had no scratches, no bruises, nothing other than a straight through and through. It went right through her arm, single stab. That was it.
It was an attack. She was attacked. She certainly wasn't the attacker. But they concluded that she alone attacked Hammond, and all of the wounds that are on Hammond, they attributed all of those wounds to Nicki, correct?
They did not attribute the bruising to his head to Nicki.
The knife wounds.
But yes, every other wound, Nicki, the judge felt she was some sort of superwoman who could dart in and dart out and attack a man who was incredibly physically fit and 100 pounds larger than she was and sustain no other injuries. The judge actually believed that Hammond was sitting on top of Nicole in a roadway, and Nicole was wearing a tank top, and she would sustain no scrapes, no contusions, nothing of that nature.
Absolutely no wounds at all, other than the wound where she was attacked. And it's important to note, too, that Hammond did not lose his strength from the wounds that he had initially. He had actually gotten himself onto a taxi and gotten down the street, and he was still had his physical strength at the time of the fight. He hadn't, his fatal wound did not take effect for quite some time. So his strength was not diminished by the initial wounds. He was still able to fight. me looking at him, I would say he was fighting off multiple people. That's speculation from a layperson, but I don't see any possibility that those wounds came from one woman that he was rolling around on the ground with, and then that woman had absolutely no transfer of any evidence whatsoever, no bruises, no cuts, no scrapes, nothing at all to show that she had been in a fight with a man 100 pounds heavier than she was.
And a man whose hands were bleeding profusely yet managed to get not a drop on Nicole, and her clothing was tested extensively.
There's absolutely no transfer to Nicki's clothing. Yet,
none.
Clive was telling me earlier today that Hammond's shirt was never tested. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Clive?
I don't know. All I know is the fact that it wasn't tested. Christine will know more about the legal ins and outs surrounding it. I just wanted to say there was one tiny spot of blood on one of Nicki's shoes very close to the ground level that belonged to Hammond, which I think could easily be explained by the fact that his blood was on the ground and she may have stepped in it. Contrast Faith Watts, who had spots of blood from Hammond on her shorts and high up on her Doc Martin boots, far more, and she also had a bite mark high up on her forearm, the sort of bite that you might get if you had your arm around somebody's neck. So there's a huge contrast there between Nicki and Faith. The forensic evidence shouts out that Nicki was not involved in this fight. To me, it seems impossible that she could achieve what the judge held she did and yet remain completely free of any blood, saliva, fibers, anything, bruises, cuts, all of which count as forensic transfer. It's just not possible. Sorry, you were going to ask about the shirt, which Christine, I think, is more has more information.
It's more just
about.
to confirm that during this investigation, they never tested the shirt of the victim.
No.
To see if there was any transfer from the killer.
No, you could clearly see blood on the shirt of the victim, and not only did they not test it, they actively worked against the defense testing it. We had very limited funds for DNA testing afterwards. In Ontario, the Forensic Services is supposed to be an independent service that is available to both the Crown prosecutors and the defense. But once we received her first disclosure and found in her notes we only need to find one spot of blood on Nicki's clothing, we realized we needed our own testing. We had $10,000, and we needed George Dranicek's items tested. We needed more items of Faith Watts tested. We needed items of Jeremy Woolley tested. And we wanted the shirt tested.
And the prosecution had absolutely no interest in testing these items because they were focused on convicting one person.
They had to go 5 rounds of testing to find any of Hammond's blood on Nicki on her shoe, on her toe cap of her shoe. They found blood on Faith Watts immediately, and that didn't seem to trigger any alarm bells on them. Each round of testing, they found more and more blood of Ross Hammond on Faith Watts, and yet they continued.
Right, and she never was brought back to Canada for any questioning whatsoever. She gave a video response, and they let it be, correct?
She gave a video response for the defense. The Crown fought us tooth and nail at having Faith come back into the country to testify. So Nicki's wonderful trial lawyer and his team, out of their own pocket, rented an office suite where there was also a corresponding suite in San Francisco, and Faith testified. The Crown declined on 2 occasions to cross-examine her, and that's how we got her evidence.
It's amazing. The time is going quick here. Before we move on, I'd like to let our listeners know that in the last segment of the show, we will be taking phone calls. We are speaking today with Nicole's mom, and also with Clive Wismayer, who is a English solicitor for some 30 years, I believe. He's done extensive research on this case. The phone number here is 347-850-1478. Please call with any questions or comments. In the last half of the show, it's 347-850-1478. And we have a few minutes left here before we get to that time. I'd like to discuss other possible suspects that were completely ignored. I don't know if Faith had anything to do with the murder itself, but she was certainly ignored, and there's more evidence pointing to her than to Nicki, because obviously I don't see any evidence pointing to Nicki. So there is evidence that points to Faith. She should have been investigated. There was also other people at the scene that were ignored, isn't that right?
Clive, I'm going to let you handle this one because I get a little emotional about it.
Okay, well, we'll call names. There's a guy in the pasta vid, that's a street, shop front camera, picked up some of the action, and into this 2 or 3 minutes of film, there appears a guy called Hal Amaro. Hal Amaro has a reputation on the street as a violent person. He was part of the group that was celebrating Nicki's birthday. He was there. We think he's probably the guy seen lifting his shirt, showing off stab wounds. And he certainly didn't hang around to go with Nicki to the ambulance. He made himself scarce. He was investigated in a most perfunctory and reluctant way by Gary Giroux, the detective sergeant, who got round to interviewing him, as I understand it, a year or year and a half after the events, when, of course, all forensic evidence will have disappeared, and the investigation was, as I say, perfunctory. Were you involved? No, thanks very much, you can go. Something like that. He's a far better candidate for the killer, having experience in knife fights. He told a witness, Sean Park, that he had been stabbed 19 times before. So there's a guy who is, and by the way, he also, I think, can be picked up in the pasta video actually fighting. We see a guy's leg and shoe and sock. And we get a very good view of Hal Amaro later on with the same, looking to me, leg, shoe, and sock. So we may be even able to see him fighting. I would like, if there's a minute or two,
sure,
to tell the related story of Gary Flynn.
You have time. Let's talk about him.
Well, this same pasta video shows it's looking down at what you guys call the sidewalk. And every now and again somebody appears in vision and disappears. There's a whole bunch of people going up and down the sidewalk looking in the direction of the fighting, which is going on just out of shot. And one of these guys is a cyclist who's cycling along the sidewalk. He stops, he sits, and he looks for a few seconds in the direction of the fighting. He goes out of shot, he comes back later, and he looks again. Now, at the trial, on the first day that Gary Giroux gave evidence, he was taken through the pasta vid and asked to name all the people in it. And when he was asked to name this guy, he said he didn't know who he was. And some surprise was expressed at that, and no doubt that communicated itself to Giroux. He went back to the police station that night, came back the next day, the second day of the trial. This is 4 years later. And suddenly he knows who the guy is. It's Gary Flynn. He just asked in the canteen, and they knew, oh, that's Gary Flynn. So here is an eyewitness who calmly watched the incident from a few feet away, who Giroux did not bother to track down, even though it would have taken him nothing more than a conversation in the canteen to find out who he was. And he's not alone. There are other people also who were tracked down by City TV, the local TV station. They were interviewing one particular woman The next day, perfectly respectable woman who had seen the incident, who gave an account on TV of what she saw. The police made no effort to find her. Another guy, a street kid called Scott McPhee, now dead, he also spoke to the cameras the next day or the day after. He wasn't interviewed by the police. So this was...
Clive, could I make one quick comment? Scott McPhee was actually rounded up the next day, and a knife was taken from him and entered into evidence, never tested, sat in a storage locker. It wasn't until Nicki's defense team found a cop who could explain further what his notes didn't say, what wasn't in his notes, that we found that, yes, there was another knife there. Witnesses had seen that, but the police work was
I didn't know that,
shoddy.
I didn't know that. But the point I was making was that 4 people were rounded up. Round up the usual suspects, the ones who just hand themselves in. They'll do. Don't bother to investigate anybody
And
else.
all these other people, they left the scene that night after the brawl and went home.
Yeah.
They locked in on the few people that stuck around because Nicki stuck around because she had a horrible wound she needed treated by the paramedics.
And
she
her
didn't
friends
leave.
took her to the ambulance.
If she would have just finished brutally attacking a man who was being put into an ambulance, I don't see any way that she would have stayed at the scene. For me, that was a very telling moment because she stuck around and was very vocal about what had happened, and she was trying to get help, and they're loading Hammond under the ambulance. She's not nervous that she's standing next to this man. She doesn't think anything about it. If she had just attacked him and committed that attack on that man, I don't think she would have been standing there. It doesn't seem logical to me at all.
I agree with you, Bruce. I agree with you 100%. The judge, unfortunately, saw that as criminal mastermind. He thought that she had the presence of mind to think that if she stayed, it would look better. That is what he said.
To me, that's just pure insanity. But that's just my opinion.
I agree with you.
Well, I want everybody to know that we are going to start taking calls in a few minutes here. I would like to play a song of Nicki's first because she's very talented, and I'd like the listeners to hear her artistic talents. The song was recorded the best that Nicki could possibly record it with her situation, so if it cuts in and out or if it's not perfect, hopefully one day soon Nicki will be in a studio somewhere and she can record a perfect copy for us. But for callers here, the number here is 347-850-1478. I'm going to go ahead and take a little break here. We're going to listen to that song, and then we'll take calls.
But there's things I've got to
Okay, we are back. We're going to start taking calls now. The number here, 347-850-1478. We're going to go to the lines here. We have a couple callers currently on hold. So this call is coming in from the 757 area code. You are on the air. Do you have a question or a comment?
Hey, Bruce. It's Matt Barata. I got involved with this case, like many of us, because I learned about wrongful convictions with Amanda Knox, and this case has absolutely consumed me because I just can't believe that they convicted her on this flimsy evidence. Well, no evidence. And the show tonight was very well done. As I was sitting there saying I'd like to input a comment, somebody would cover it very well. And I actually started out trying to do what Clive initially talked about, and instead I ended up writing an emotional article from Toria's perspective, Nicki's younger sister, that summarizes many of the reasons for the wrongful conviction. But as you talked about earlier, there's a very personal toll that this takes on the entire family and friends. And I actually traveled up to Canada a year ago to meet Nicki and family. And when I met Nicki in person, I was absolutely amazed at her character, her integrity, and you look across at her and you're like, this wrongly convicted person is asking, me questions about my life and is worried about her pod mates, and she's living in the absolute worst possible scenarios that I can imagine. So she's just an amazing person. There's no way she's guilty. and her entire family. I've never seen more supportive people. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your support. I know I've read a couple of your articles online, and we talk occasionally on Facebook, so thank you for the call.
Have a good one.
We have a online question here. There cannot be a retrial of the facts at the appeal, so what is the main issue at appeal that could free Nicki, and how would the prosecution possibly attack it?
Well, there are three grounds of appeal. Very briefly, the first one is that the identification evidence of Stopford and Paget, the two streetcar passengers, was inconclusive and unreliable, and certainly that's the case. They both admitted freely in cross-examination that they were not sure that they had correctly identified Nicki. If they're not sure, nor can the judge be sure, nor can any jury, so that point has to be a good one. The second point is more complicated, that it's a generalized attack on the judge's way of sifting through the evidence, his way of cherry-picking his way through the various witness statements to take the bits that fit his theory and reject the bits that didn't, which is another big standout problem with the judgment. And the third main plank of the appeal concerns Faith Watts, and it's a bit technical, but it's to do with the principle of confrontation. It was not put to Watts at prelim that she was the killer by Nicki's defense counsel, and because she was not confronted in this way, the judge decided that he was entitled to completely disregard the hypothesis that she was the killer. Now, it just so happens I don't believe Faith Watts was the killer myself, but the case against her is vastly better than the one against Nicki. She has forensic transfer. It was her knife. Just taking those two things only, that sets her apart from Nicki. And there's plenty of identification evidence just as or more solid than against Nicki, that the woman in the fight was blonde-haired, or that she had short trousers, or that she wore ankle-high boots. All of those things fit Nicki. Now, the judge said, well, I don't have to consider all of that because of this technical failure to confront Faith Watts when she gave evidence at prelim. Anyway, the appeal takes a really good point about that. I think it's a very strong point in the appeal. How will the Crown meet all this stuff? I can think of arguments that the Crown may come up with. If you don't mind, I'm not going to elaborate them. I don't want to give them any ideas.
Absolutely, I would agree with that myself.
Thanks, Clive. That was great.
Now, looking at the evidence on Faith, you're not accusing Faith of the crime, but it shows complete misconduct to not investigate the person that has evidence pointing in their direction. And this goes not only for her, but for everybody else who was at the scene that was completely ignored. But that one is the most egregious one, because the knife was hers, and like you said, there was transfer. Everything was there to bring her back to Canada.
Yeah, that's right. I do not accuse Faith Watts. I don't believe either that she was the killer. Obviously, I could be wrong. I don't know. But the case against her, this is the point, is way better than the case against Nicki. Far better, because of the factors that I've mentioned. Identification, transfer, ownership of the knife. All of that applies to Faith either more or the same as Nicki. And I think that the story unfolded gradually so that the officer, Detective Sergeant Giroux, leapt at his number one theory, which is the person who brings a knife to a fight is the one who gets cut. And so he inferred backwards from the fact that she got cut that she must have brought the knife to the fight, which is a kind of strange way of reasoning. He made no such inference with Jeremy Woolley. Jeremy Woolley, Nicki's boyfriend, he had a cut on his arm, but nobody inferred backwards from that he must therefore have brought a knife to the fight. In fact, his his account was very readily accepted by the police, and
right. He only applied the rules to Nicki. He didn't apply it to anybody else at the scene. He was focused. He had the blinders on, and he was focused on one mission, and unfortunately, he accomplished it. Now, I have another caller on the line. This is a 301 area code. 301. Do you have a question or comment?
Hi, Bruce. This is Mike Skadron here.
Hey, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm very good.
I read Clive's opus earlier today for the first time, and what strikes me is the judge's mindset, which comes up pretty early, that although he recognizes that identifying eyewitness testimony is very, very complicated in the case, that you shouldn't ignore it. And it seems to me that he wants to go out and find and solve this case no matter what it takes. And then he sets about to do that based on who the police and the prosecutors have charged. That said, I've corresponded with Nicki, and I think she's a wonderful person, and it just continues to baffle me, as with the Amanda Knox case, that they go out and they pick one of they could search the globe and not find someone less likely to commit violence against another person, and just go about and find the evidence no matter what, and try to get a conviction at all costs. My question, though, is to Clive, and I heard the three avenues of appeal, but what about this irresistible inference that because there was blood on the knife that this caused, and that Nicki was stabbed, that this means that she was the stabber or killer? It strikes me that this itself could be somehow play a role in the grounds for an appeal, does it not?
Well, there are lots of ways of skinning a cat. I'm not part of the appeal team. It would have been a point that I would have taken. It isn't a point that Nicki's lawyers have taken. They are specialists in the field. I'm not. They've taken a different strategy, which I think is to focus on what they probably think is a simple point for the appeal court to get, which is that the case against Faith is far better than the case against Nicki. So I don't know what they're going to do if the judges like Nordheimer's point, that's the judge below. I don't know what they're going to say about that, but I'm sure they've figured it out. But I agree with you.
Because if you come up with any other scenario that's a reasonable one, you've got reasonable doubt right there.
Yeah, so I think they've kept it reasonably simple, that we've got this woman, Faith Watts. Some of the witnesses identify a woman who looks like her as being involved in the fight itself. It's her knife, that's an absolute fact, and she has copious transfer, both in terms of injuries to her body and blood on her clothes and on her boots. Compared to Nicki, she's in a completely different league of possible suspects. So, and the only reason that she has been excluded from consideration is this rather dry technicality the judge has fastened on of failure to confront her. And by the way, the appeal takes a very good point about that. She was cross-examined at prelim before the information about the forensic transfer was known. So John Scarf, defense counsel, did not know when he was questioning her that she had had blood on her shorts and her boots, which makes an enormous difference to the line of questioning he's going to pursue. Anyway, that's the answer to your question, Mike.
Okay, well, thanks very much, and thank you, Bruce.
Thank you. Thanks for your continued support, and thanks for the call.
Sure.
Take another online question here. There's a couple readers here that would like to know how this appeal hearing works in October. Is it a judge panel? The first trial was a single judge. Is this appeal? Is it a judge panel? And what can happen on that day? What are the possibilities?
Well, it is a panel of judges. It will be 3 appeals court judges, and we won't know who they are until that very morning. Hopefully the factum that Nicki's lawyers have sent in is sufficiently interesting that they've read it and understood it. And each side will have between 25 to 45 minutes to present their oral arguments. The judges are free to ask questions for as long as they want, and then they have to come up with one of 4 different answers to this appeal. First, they can do nothing, and that would be the worst possible scenario for us. If all 3 judges decide that the verdict is fine, it would be very hard for us to move forward. But if even one of the judges finds that, yes, there were errors, then we do have another avenue to follow. The second thing that the panel of judges can do is replace her second-degree conviction with a manslaughter conviction. Now, legally, I'm not even sure how that works because it just sounds bizarre to me, but apparently they can do that. They can also order a new trial, and that is the most likely scenario for this case. In ordering a new trial, the appeals court, they don't really have to put themselves out there. And
right,
finally, and hopefully,
basically handing the ball to another court.
Exactly. It would bounce right back to the same courthouse where Justice Nordheimer assigns judges to trials, and he would assign a new trial judge to this case. Or
now, there's no possibility that he would get the case again?
He could not get the case again. He would have to recuse himself.
Okay, that's good news.
He was Nicki's bail hearing judge, so he did have to call both the defense and the Crown to get their permission to sit as the trial judge.
Okay.
In this case, there is no way on earth the defense would ever allow him to hear it again. Nicki was very lucky. She had a very dedicated, very hard-working defense team, and unlike many, not all, but many wrongful convictions, it wasn't faulty lawyering that caused this. And finally, there is one other option for the panel of judges, and that's the option we are hoping for, and that is acquittal.
Would that be immediate?
That would be immediate.
Okay. It's probably less likely, like you said, a new trial would be more likely, but an acquittal would sure be great, wouldn't it?
Acquittal would be wonderful. And here's where I would just, if I could take a moment, Nicki and myself would like to really thank everyone at Injustice Anywhere, because if the most likely scenario happens and there is a new trial, wow, the work that has been done on the forums on Nicole's behalf is just, it's amazing. The amount of time and effort that the people here, that the people on Injustice Anywhere have put into looking at every tiny detail will be invaluable to her defense team. It moves the case from, it puts us on almost even footing with the Crown is what it does.
We have a great group of people on the forum. Not much of that work could be credited to Clive. He's done an outstanding job with analyzing this case. But there are many people in that discussion that have really done great work. So they'll appreciate hearing that from you. We have another call here I'd like to go to. You are live on the air. Do you have a question or comment?
Good evening. Good evening there. It's midnight here. I'm well on into the early morning. This is Dave Tupper. I post on Injustice Anywhere as Dave E.T. Hi, Christine.
Hello, Dave.
Nice to hear you live at last. I do have a very specific question on the evidence. I've long felt that there's much in the forensic and physical evidence in this case that was never fully explored at trial. But one thing that's occurred to me fairly recently, and I did ask this question on the forum, but nobody was posting at the time, so I don't know if it ever got seen, and that's regarding the mystery of the lost tapes. We know about the pastor vid that was mistimed and mistaped in some manner, although there does appear to be some confusion whether they got the right day and the wrong time, or the wrong time and the right day. But regardless of that, during Giroux' testimony, they went to enormous lengths to work out what that missing tape would have shown. And I'm wondering why on earth they needed to do that when they should have had the wrong tape. that was misrecorded. So they should know exactly what could be seen from that. So is it the case that, in fact, they didn't lose 2 tapes, they actually lost or destroyed 3 tapes, including the one that they actually recorded at the wrong time? Does anybody know what happened to that recording?
I do. I believe it's 2 tapes.
If you don't think it's reasonable to say, Christine, then that's absolutely fine.
No, I believe that it's 2 tapes. This is something I have spent, I cannot tell you, countless hours looking into. The pasta video, the restaurant had 2 security cameras in the front of the restaurant, one that faced east and one that faced west. The original detective assigned to the case, while it was still a simple assault case, did his job. He sent out a platoon of police to Queen Street to go to each and every business and knock on the door and look for video. At the pasta restaurant, they found the video. The detective in charge, Detective Scott at the time, watched a couple minutes of the video with the owner of the restaurant, and he saw only men involved in a fight with Ross Hammond. He relayed this to Detective Sergeant Giroux because he was keeping Giroux abreast of the details of the case because it could be a homicide. So Giroux was well aware that this tape was very important. Detective Scott did exactly what his training told him to do, and he called tech services and asked for a special technician to come down to the restaurant and take both the videotapes. Apparently, if we believe Giroux, this never happened, and 4 days later he had to send another technician down who was able to capture one of the, I believe it was the west-facing video, but managed to tape over the east-facing video. Giroux, knowing the importance of these tapes, never looked at them. He swears he never looked at the tapes before Nicki was charged with second-degree murder, and indeed nobody in the Toronto Police Force will say that they watched the tapes at that time. There was a videotape from a business 2 doors down from the pasta restaurant that had an actual old VHS video, which they said showed the sidewalk. Due to an address problem in the Toronto, the police that collected it wrote down the wrong street address. We thought we had that. We do have other videos that show nothing. So we thought we had that. It wasn't until it went to the 3rd and final crown that they investigated further and found out, yes, there was a second videotape missing. So there is 2 missing videotapes. There's actually about 10 tapes, but most of them show nothing. Does that answer your question, Dave?
But there isn't a tape from whichever camera it was that they haven't got. We've got one videotape that we know about. The one that was facing the other way, there is actually no tape from that at all. Is that correct?
No tape at all. The fact is that recorder that recorded the tapes only could record for, I think it was 21 days. And believe it or not, police in a whodunit murder mystery where they did not have anyone who could firmly ID didn't bother to look at the videotape evidence. So it was the defense calling the police saying, there's obviously another videotape here. We're looking at it, but the date is wrong. And when they went back 1 year later, there was nothing left. It had been recorded over many, many, many times.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for that, Christine.
That's the story. I believe they had it and just erased it.
Yeah, that's what I would think too.
Yes.
Nice to talk to you. Thank you so much for the call, and we will see you on the Injustice Anywhere forum. We have about 9 minutes left here. Is there anything left that Clive would like to add? I think we hit all the major points with the evidence and the missing, the misconduct that we've seen with the investigation, the suspects that weren't interviewed. Was there any key topics that you feel like we need to go over?
We have done a pretty good job of covering it quite comprehensively. I just wanted to, if I may, plug Injustice Anywhere a little bit, because Christine's quite right that there are some fantastic people contributing there, and anyone who wants to involve themselves in a case like this to any depth can't do better than going to a place like Injustice Anywhere and immersing themselves in one or more cases, because the amount of material one can access is vast, and there really are points to discover for those who want to try and do it. But I have benefited enormously from not just Christine, but also the posters on Injustice Anywhere over the last year or two, learning about how to analyze these cases. And so I just wanted to say that, because I've had a lot of praise for the report I wrote on this case, but I actually learned a heck of a lot on the way from guys at Injustice Anywhere before I put it together.
I didn't mention all the other names on the forum because I haven't received permission to put that on the air, but there's many people that have helped out with this. I mentioned Clive, of course, because he's been so active. But you can reach our forum. If you go to our main website, you can see a link to the forum. It's very easy to get to. If you need to register, it takes 2 minutes to register and you're in. We accept everybody. Everybody's free to participate on that site. So please take Clive's advice and join the Injustice Anywhere forum. I think that you'll find it a great experience. Christine, is there anything that you feel like we need to touch base on?
I think you've covered the case very well. I think you've covered the appeal very well. I'm with Clive in saying that everybody should log in and look at the cases. Nicki's case, I'm so glad that she's a featured case, but there's other ones out there. I mean, I look at Jamie Snow, I look at Ryan Ferguson, I look at so many people that you have helped that are free now. I look at Amanda Knox, and what you guys have done there is amazing. I hope that you continue it. I really value that you spend your time, you spend your effort to helping the wrongfully convicted, because it's not just the people that are sitting in jail, it's not just their families. It's all of society that suffers from wrongful convictions. It means there is someone who did something terribly wrong who is getting away scot-free.
Well, our group, I'll tell you, we have a really great group of people. I'm one of many, and I'm always shocked to see how much effort people put into the causes. There's a lot of passionate people out there, and Injustice Anywhere is going to keep fighting for Nicki until she's free. We're never going to stop. So you'll have our support until that day comes. And I'm speaking here for a lot of people because we have a really good group of people. I'm really just a webmaster as far as that goes. There's so many people involved that do a lot of great work. I want to, one more time, plug the freenicki.org site, because there is a link on there to donate to Nicki's Defense Fund. These things are very expensive for families. Going through this is a nightmare, but it's also a financial burden. So if you are able, please go to freenicki.org and donate what you can to the Defense Fund. We have just under 5 minutes, and another caller has just come in, so let's see if we can squeeze this call in. We're at a 604 area code. You're on the air. Do you have a question or comment?
Oh, a comment as much as anything. It's Norm Marples calling from Vancouver, and great supporter of Nicki. Love the work you do, Bruce, and Sarah as well. And Clive, oh, boy, do I ever love reading how you can decipher things. Really appreciate it. I guess the comment I'd like to make is how all of these cases seem to have so many common threads when somebody's innocent, and it just jumps right out at you. And, of course, Amanda Knox is the first one that you would use as a comparison, but every single one of them is the same. Police decide who done it, and then they make their case fit around that, and they get rid of all evidence that points to another solution and pursue it, and nobody stops them. They get away with it. And I don't know why they do it. I guess maybe they get points or promotions or whatever the purpose is. But it's really annoying, and and it happens every day. And it certainly
well, keep up the support and keep active watching all these cases, because they are unique to themselves, but there are always little key points, like you said, that are common within a lot of wrongful convictions. So it's a great point to make. Thank you for supporting Nicki, and please, stay tuned to this case because we're all very hopeful for the end of October, and we're hoping that this gets corrected. So thank you very much for the call.
I'll be there, but look, I don't want to take up any time. I know we're almost out of time. I'm going to let you guys go finish the show up. Thanks very much. Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
I'd like to really thank Clive for sticking with us tonight. It's about 3:30 in the morning where he is, so thank you very much, Clive. And
pleasure.
You answered a lot of great questions, and you've done great work on this case, and I hope that we have a very long relationship together when it comes to fighting wrongful convictions.
Yeah, me too.
And Christine, thank you for being on the show. My heart goes out to you and your family. Like I said, we're going to be there for you until the end. So stay strong, and let's hope for good things in October.
Thank you very much. You and Sarah, you have Nicki and my thanks.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We're just about out of time. Please check our website, injustice-anywhere.org, for information on next week's radio program. Thank you for tuning in. Good night.